Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren Manier, and I am a Senior Program Associate with the Inclusive STEM Ecosystems for Equity and Diversity, or ICED program at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. I work on our AAAS IUS initiative, which is hosting today's workshop titled The Faculty Role in Creating Inclusive STEM Environments. And we're very excited to hear from our presenters today, Dr. Susan Keenan and Dr. Marissa Krusosku. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. This presentation is being recorded. The recording will be made available in the coming weeks on our website at AAAS-IUS.org, and the slides will be posted in the chat. You will also receive an email with a link to these materials when they're available. Please note that we will transition into breakout room discussions following the presentation, and these breakouts will not be recorded. We do have closed captioning for this workshop, and you can download and view the full transcript by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So before we turn it over to our presenters, here's a little background about AAAS IUS and our initiative. So for those who are new, this initiative seeks to support faculty, students, and the greater undergraduate STEM education community by disseminating research, knowledge about STEM teaching, learning, equity, and institutional transformation. We invite you to learn more about the AAAS IUS initiative on our website, and we hope that you will join our community as future contributors. You can also follow us on Twitter at IUS Program or on LinkedIn to stay up to date on our latest events, blogs, or to share what you've learned at today's workshop. Additionally, I want to draw your attention to our call for workshop presenters and blog authors for the 2023 calendar year. If you're interested in sharing your work at a workshop like this or through a blog post, please check out our call for submissions, which is posted on our website. The submission period will close December 1st. So now we'd like to turn it over to our first presentation of the day. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Susan Keenan, who's an Associate Dean at College Structures and Student Affairs at the University of Northern Colorado. So Susan, over to you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Let me share my screen. And then hopefully everyone can see my slides. Maybe Jody can give me a thumbs up or Thomas can give me a thumbs up. Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Keenan. I use she, her pronouns. And as Lauren said, I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Natural and Health Sciences at the University of Northern Colorado. I'll be joined by my colleague, Dr. Jody Novak, who in the breakout session. And so she is the chair of the Department of Mathematical Sciences at UNC. So I'm really excited that we have the space to share the work that we've done for our Inclusive Excellent Teacher Scholar program with you all today. The program was initiated in 2017 through a Howard Hughes Medical Institute Inclusive Excellence grant. And as we begin, I want to acknowledge that while I'm here today and Jody will be here in the breakout rooms, there are lots of other contributors to this work that I really need to acknowledge. And they're shown here on this slide. So Drs. Cassie Bergstrom, Dr. Reinsvold, Shelato, Romulo, and James have also been really instrumental in this work. So, okay, so what is the IETS program? Well, we're currently in a no-cost extension, and we've delivered 4 years of the program to over 40 faculty, and we've developed close to 50 hours of faculty professional development materials. The program has a 90% completion rate, which we're really proud of, especially considering we went through COVID and we had to pivot online and do all those things that everyone else had to do in response to COVID. So we've had a 90% completion rate in the program. 68% of our folks identify as women, 15% as faculty of color, and 35% are among the first in their family to have attended college. And I share this latter identity. I'm a first generation. I still consider myself a first generation student. So the outcomes of our program, over 75% of our participants indicated in a survey that they have confidence to participate fully in activities that advance equity on campus, which is really important. One of our equity is something that we're really digging into on our campus, and so to have folks who feel like they can engage in those conversations is really important. And then 94% of our participants continue to implement equity related changes in their classroom. So they're still continuing to learn and still continuing to make those changes. So what I'm going to do today is really dig into what the IETS program is, and then provide you with an opportunity to explore some of the program with us. It's a tiny snippet, because we don't have a huge amount of time, but it's a snippet of what we're doing, and it will give you an idea of kind of how the IETS program is put together. And as we're going through these slides and this work, I would encourage you to consider how you might adapt some of this work into your own academic context. Okay, so the goal of the IETS program, really simply put, is it's a professional development model that helps faculty create more inclusive academic spaces, specifically classrooms, but we also talk a little bit about the department culture, and then we also discuss ways in which faculty and students interact outside the classroom. So you can think about things like office hours, which we've renamed on our campus to student hours to kind of give them more of an example of what that actually means. But really, how can we create inclusive environments for our students on campus? We're doing this work because academic spaces are not neutral. Right? They're not race neutral, they're not gender neutral, they're not class neutral. And because we know that faculty can create more inclusive spaces if they understand how their practices, as well as institutional policies, impact the success of students who are minoritized by STEM. So another way to look at our goal is equity and justice. And so you can see on the right-hand side of this slide that there's a diagram that many of us have seen different versions of, right? So this describes inequality, and how by providing all resources to the same students, we can make things, we can provide equality, but it's not until we provide the resources each student needs to thrive that we really have an equitable environment. Most of these diagrams don't include the justice piece. And the justice really pays attention to the structures and the processes in higher education that continue to perpetuate the inequities. Or So the IETS program fundamentally focuses on closing equity gaps, equity disparities in higher education by rethinking equity in terms of institutional and faculty change, and not focusing on student deficits. When we're focusing on students, we're focusing on student assets. When we were planning this work way back in 2017, we were really fortunate as a group to be able to have a 6-month interaction with Dr. Lindsay Malcolm-Foucault from the Center. At the time, she was from the Center of Urban Education at the University of Southern California. Hugh's work in equity mindedness provided a foundation for our work. Equity mindedness really means being evidence-based, race-conscious, institutionally and systemically aware, and equity advancing. So the programming brings together a cohort of 10 faculty. The cohort meets over a full academic year. So it's quite an investment of people's time. The first 2 meetings take place in the fall, just before classes start. And these sessions, they're full-day sessions, and they focus on creating an equity-minded syllabus, using disaggregated data to understand what's going on at our institution in terms of student success. And then throughout the academic year, the participants come together roughly once a month, so 10 more times throughout the academic year. Through funding from the HHMI grant, we were able to provide a stipend. The stipend was approximately $2,500 for folks who completed the program. We have since institutionalized the IETS program at our institution, and it's called the Teaching for Equity and Inclusion program. And we actually only offer participants $150 in professional development incentives to do the same work. So it was important for us to be able to continue this work without the funding that was given to us by HHMI. Okay, so what do we cover and how are the sessions structured? So each workshop focuses on one or more topics that helps faculty explore how they can positively impact the student experience. The IETS program, it covers all of the mainstays that you would expect in academia. It talks about the syllabus, talks about classroom participation, it talks about course content, talks about how we grade and our assessment strategies. Over the years, as we continue to develop and define the program, we kind of put each one of these topics into 4 pillars, and that's what you're seeing here. The 4 pillars that we have are who we are, and who we are as faculty, who we are as instructors, how we teach, what we teach, and then how we assess. You can see some of the topics that we cover in each one of these sections here. It's not an all-inclusive group, but it gives you an idea of what the topics are. So you'll notice that some of the topics could fit in more than one category, but we really found that having these pillars and paying attention to these pillars reminded us to explore topics that our participants and also perhaps we as facilitators found more challenging, right? So it's easy or easier to talk about how we teach, right? What do we do in the classroom? How do we interact with students? Than it is to think about who we are, right? To think about our privilege, to think about exclusionary narratives that are in our classrooms, to talk about race, to talk about racism, to talk about other isms. You know, it's also more difficult to talk about what we teach, right? How do we deconstruct whiteness in a classroom? How do we include social justice elements into, especially STEM classrooms, right? How does that happen? And then, of course, the other pillar that we have is how we assess. And it's interesting because how we assess actually can be quite challenging for folks to discuss. If you can challenge people to think about not having a 0 and only grading 50 to 100%, we've got some really interesting conversations as we've discovered over the years. So, okay, so each session begins with a reflection, kind of what happened in the session before. Every time we finish a session, participants have homework to do, so they have post-session work. We talk about that as they're coming into the next session. And then every time we finish the session, we end with a survey. So every time the group meets, we have a survey, and that it enables us to check the pulse of what people are doing and how they're feeling and what they're challenged by, so that we can adjust the programming as necessary. In our workshops, we have 3 different types of sessions, and the session is determined by how and when the participants engage with the content. So we have a type 1 session, for example, and that's, I'm going to give you an example, a little snippet of a type 1 session as we move along today. But a type 1 session is where the initial engagement is actually in the session itself. And then the post session enables us to have the extended engagement and the implementation pieces. And racial oppression is an example of a type 1 session. A type 2 session is where faculty or participants engage in the work before the workshop begins. So there's some pre-work. It could be a reading, it could be watching a video, and then we extend that engagement in the session itself, and then they implement it after in the post-session work. Then type 3, grace in teaching and reframing is a good example of that. And so Francis Sue has a great article on how we should give each other grace, and it's really timely and important in the academic context that we're all in right now. And then how do we reframe student behaviors in a way that really has an equity lens? And then type 3 sessions are where the initial engagement and the implementation are both in the session structure, and then there's a continued implementation. We have a couple of days session on equity syllabi and how do you create an equity-minded syllabus. And if we have time in the breakout group, we might be able to touch on some of that information. But that's an example of a type 3 where, participants are introduced to the idea and then are given work time to actually start making those changes. Okay, so what we'll do next is we're going to, as a group, engage in the snippet of one topic. So we have 50 hours of professional development. So we're just going to jump into one snippet of that. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give us a little bit of context. I'm going to tell you a little bit about UNC and the University of Northern Colorado, and who we are as an institution. Then I'm going to ask you to engage in reading the snippet and responding. And then we're going to talk about how, I'm going to have a quick discussion about the hows and whys of the session, and then how the participants responded. Okay, so to set the context, University of Northern Colorado has historically been a predominantly white institution. Our faculty are overwhelmingly white. I think our number in STEM at least is over 70%, maybe closer to 80%. However, we are intentionally emerging as a Hispanic serving institution. So we chose this activity because as a predominantly white institution, we have two related problems. One is understanding how white privilege plays out for students. And the second is understanding the experiences of the students of color in the STEM classrooms. So I'm going to give you a snippet. I'm going to ask you to read a small section from an article by McKee and Martin that was published in 2011. The title of the article is "You Would Not Believe What I Have to Go Through to Prove My Intellectual Value: Stereotype Management Among Academically Successful Black Mathematics and Engineering Students." It was published about a decade ago in 2011, but it's still very relevant today. So the structure is that the structure of the session would be that the participants have already read the introduction. We've had some discussions. We've had those discussions as a think, pair, share as a larger group. And now we're getting into the voices of the students. And so that's where we're going to jump in to this. So it's kind of jumping into the middle, but as I said, it gives you an idea of what we're doing. So what's going to happen is I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to read the snippet that we have. And then I'm going to ask you to think about what your initial reaction is to that snippet. And then I'm going to give you some prompts, and then I ask you to respond to those prompts. So, okay, so here is the snippet of the article. So a Black student in a math class engaged in excessive nodding to show that they understood the lesson, even when they did not. And here's the quote from the student. "Sometimes it seems like they're watching me to make sure that I get that, or that I belong. It's like they're waiting for me to mess up. So I just nod no matter what. And then at an inconspicuous hour, I go and find the teaching assistant." I want you to take just a minute and to think about your response to that. And you can jot it down if you feel like engaging in the chat. We can certainly do that. Okay, so then we would have participants respond to a couple of prompts. So the first prompt would be to write 1 or 2 sentences that interpret an aspect of the scenario from the student's point of view. So again, jot your ideas down on your piece of paper, or feel free to put them into the chat. So really, what are 1 or 2 things that interpret an aspect of this scenario from the Black student's point of view? I agree. So Brian added in the chat that it's sad that the student is being coached to think this way. Agreed. And so Claudia adds that the student is feeling anxious and not feeling safe, right? And so the nodding piece is a way to cover that up, right? So the student does not feel accepted or accepted in this space. Okay, so these are some great responses. So then I want us to think in the next level, what burdens are being placed on the Black student in this classroom that the white students generally do not experience? Again, you can share in chat or just jot down your ideas. So the student feels like they're an imposter. Yep, agreed. Yeah, no time and energy to listen or to learn. So that's definitely a burden that the Black student has. Stereotype threat for sure. Yep. Great. Okay. So what happens? So thank you so much for participating. And sometimes it's hard to know who's out there, right, when you're presenting in these environments. So thank you so much. Okay, so as facilitators, and when we're providing these workshops, we really do consider ourselves facilitators and guides, and certainly not experts. We've thought through our interpretations, and we thought through some of the burdens that we've identified, and we put these together in a facilitation guide. Sometimes we share these insights with faculty and the participants in the program, mostly because as white people, it's hard for us to see privilege in our classrooms, and so the more information that we can have to do that. So here's some of the interpretations that we have listed kind of in our facilitation guides. That sure, they they feel like they're being watched and that they don't belong, and that they nod to show that the teacher, because it seems that they don't want to provide a wrong answer. And the burdens are that they actually have to find additional time to go and ask those questions, right? That's one of the many burdens that we see, and other people have added other things into the chat. So when the workshop is over, we ask, maybe I've skipped a slide. There we go. I was like, that doesn't seem right. We need to talk about why we do this, right? So we do this workshop, and participants have already talked about white privilege and other privileges, right? They've already talked about dominant and exclusionary narratives in STEM. And we do this type of session because it's hard for white people to see privilege as it plays out in the classroom and to really understand what's happening. This article uses student voices, and that is so powerful for our participants to have the voices of students. And then learning together, which is why this is a type 1 type of session, is where we introduce this in the session itself. Learning together makes this more accessible. And we've created a psychologically safe space for our participants. This is a cohort, and it enables us to have these conversations. As I mentioned, we have a facilitation guide that has all of the details, and that also has recommended background prep for facilitators to read, explanations for facilitation choices, timing of the facilitation guide. And then I have 2 minutes left. I promise not to go over time, Lauren. I wanted to just say that our continued engagement piece is that when the workshop is over, we have either a teaching experiment or a reflection activity that faculty have to do before they come back the following time. The teaching experiment really asks them to implement something into a classroom. The reflection experiment really is for them to think about who they are as an educator, as a person. And for this particular process, we gave them a series of readings that they could choose to do, and then for them to think about what those readings are, and then to think reflexively about how they felt and why they chose the readings that they did. So how did our faculty respond? So some of our faculty were challenged to see the differences. Some had fixed or deficit-minded thinking. Others were thoughtful and really aware that they needed to be more careful about assuming that strategies they use supported all students. So my time is up, but if you have questions, both Jody Novak and I will be in the discussion group, or you can contact us. Our contact information is here. You can read more about the IETS program in a recent publication, the top one of these two. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keenan. We appreciate you being here today and sharing your work with us. And we're looking forward to speaking with you and Dr. Novak in the discussion room and continuing this conversation. So I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Marissa Krusoko, who is a professor and department head of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Connecticut. So Marissa, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. And I will share my screen. And does that look okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So hello, everyone. I am very excited to talk to you about our project today and creating inclusive STEM environments for neurodiverse students. So my talk has 3 parts. The first one is to introduce the concept of neurodiversity and make sure that we're all on the same page on what we mean by that. Then I will spend only a couple of minutes introducing the Include project, and then spend most of my time talking about how we made interventions to our teaching and learning practices with a mind towards empowering neurodiverse students. So let's start with the first, with the basics. What is neurodiversity? So this term was coined in the late 90s by 2 activists in the field of neurodiversity that came out of the autism activism during the 90s. So Judy Singer and Harvey Bloom, if you Google these 2 names, you will find like the fascinating stories of both these 2 people that really created a lot of awareness around neurodiversity. And a brief definition is that neurodiversity is a natural variations in the human genome that result in differences in brain structure and or function. So in our project, we take a very broad definition of the neurodiversity that may include differences in sociability, learning, attention, mood, and other mental functions that are sometimes related to health diagnosis. So pivoting to the diagnosis part, I will mention a few types of neurodiversity that most of you are probably very familiar with. So some of these examples of the cognitive variations that may have a specific name or diagnosis include anxiety, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and others. So one thing that's important about neurodiversity is that it goes away from the medical model and that looks only onto the challenges part associated with neurodiversity. So when we're thinking of people with ADHD, you probably associate that with challenges in focus, memory, and motivation. But research shows that ADHD also comes with tremendous strengths. So specifically increased risk-taking, which means that you have the desire to kind of like open new avenues, enhanced creativity, and the ability to hyper-focus when that particular activity is very much of interest. And so when we think about other types of neurodiversity, we also see that balance between strengths and challenges. So for example, if we think about people on the spectrum, often there are strengths associated with the ability to think in systems or holistically, also pay attention to detail, and have unique abilities such as ability to work with numbers or unique memory. And often challenges that we associate with autism is difficulties with communicating, social interaction, and sensory sensitivity. And then finally, when it comes to dyslexia, some common strengths are ability to visualize in 3D, have more holistic thinking, and also increased creativity. And then challenges would be working efficiently, reading and writing, and short-term memory. And I want to stress here that this is not a laundry list of abilities or challenges that every person with dyslexia has or every person with ADHD has. This is only to illustrate that the point that these forms of neurodiversity may come with different strengths and challenges, and there's always a balance between the two. A very quick point that I want to make is that in your interaction with your students, keep in mind that neurodiversity has a very strong intersectional component. And what research shows, and we've seen in our work, is that neurodiverse students who have intersectional identities, such as if they come from minoritized backgrounds, if they're women and if they're from LGBTQA community, they are less likely to be diagnosed and less likely to seek a positive environment where they can thrive. So one question that we are often asked in our project is, how do I start a conversation with a student who I may think, that they are neurodiverse? And the answer is that you don't want to think about diagnosis, and you don't want to think about labels. When it comes to neurodiversity, the idea is that you want to have a holistic view of what a person is and work with them to see how they can make the most of their strengths and deal with their challenges. So have conversation with your students about observable behaviors. For example, if they have trouble focusing, or on the opposite, if they are really able to focus when they're doing something they're excited about. That may tell you something about how the student learns best. You want to ask general questions to find areas of challenge. Make sure that you don't only focus on the challenges, but also ask about passions and interests and unique talents. And if a student does choose to disclose a particular diagnosis or a particular challenge, make sure that you thank them for sharing and that you empower them and give them, this alternative view of the strengths, because most often in my interactions with students, I see that they lack that view that a particular challenge may also come with a strength. So very briefly about the Include project, it is part of the NSF program, Professional Formation of Engineers, Revolutionizing Engineering Departments. And the title of the project is Beyond Accommodation, Leveraging Neurodiversity for Engineering Innovation. So this is a 5-year, $2 million project that essentially aims at transforming our department to be more inclusive in terms of engaging neurodiverse learners. So the project is fairly, encompassing in terms of academic practices and activities. So we are looking at everything from recruitment and enhancing the pipeline of neurodiverse students, building an inclusive community and changing the culture and the narrative around neurodiversity, transforming our courses, advising and support, and then career preparation. But today I will only talk about the middle part here, things that we are doing in terms of making our courses more inclusive in terms of neurodiversity. So with that, I will transition to the third part of the presentation, which is teaching and learning. And I want to start by giving you a little bit of a background of the setting that we are, talking about. So UConn is a research large public university. Our department has about 400 undergraduate students. And obviously, since this is an R1, it means that faculty are very much focused on their research. And so our approach has to be something that works within that particular environment. And the goals that we have are to move beyond the current system where you send a student to a Center for Disabilities Services and you go and tell them, ask for accommodation. So we want to do the work in the classroom. We want to incorporate a strength-based approach to neurodiversity. And we also want to personalize and enhance the learning experience for all students within the constraints of that environment that I talked about. So what are the key features of what we did? So first, something that we have seen in these first 3 years of the project that plays a very important role is the adoption of the strength-based language. Talking to the students about different learning approaches and different strengths and challenges in a way that is positive really changes the narrative in terms of how the students feel a sense of belonging. And we start that by including a personalized inclusion statement in the syllabus, making sure, that every student has heard that in the class, and maintaining the same language throughout student interactions. And then we also adopted certain universal design for learning principles, but there, we were very selective. And the reason that we were selective was, again, because of the constraints that I was talking about. We wanted to think about and take those interventions that we thought would be that would be easier for faculty to incorporate in their classes and would make the most difference in terms of different learning approaches. So we definitely started from having accessible materials and learning activities, make sure we have videos for everything, captions, accessible PDFs, and so on. And then we very much also focused on students having choices in their learning and their assessments. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that. So what is the strength-based approach? What do we mean by that? It is a term that, again, you can Google and find things about it. It is rooted in the principles of positive psychology, and it focuses on identifying, developing, and applying student strengths. And it has been found to enhance overall well-being and help students thrive. And it does that by constructing a niche, which means that it helps every student find the particular way that they can thrive and do the best that they can. And I don't know why this moved by itself, but that's fine. So how do you implement the strength-based approach? You start by setting the tone. So the language that you use every day. As I mentioned before, the personalized inclusion statement and the using strength-based language to emphasize that you recognize neurodiversity as an asset. And you can do that in multiple times and in a simple ways during the semester. Just to give you a simple example, and in my classroom, at different times, I will say, I am now taking notes and uploading them. And some of you may be, working better with that. Some others, may want to have a recording of the lecture. So please don't try to do both. Think about what is the way that you learn best and utilize these alternative modes of instruction and note-taking to support your learning. And then you also want to invite students to discuss if they need any accommodations in the class, what challenges they have, and what the strengths are. So you really want to cultivate a self-awareness in the students. These are some model inclusion statements. I'm not going to read them here for the sake of time, but we have them on our website, so you can find more types of these inclusion statements that we put in our syllabi. So I want to now provide a few more examples on interventions that we do in what we call I-courses, so courses that follow inclusive standards. So we invite students to take a strength survey, like a quiz or filling out a Google form, and then use that survey to help them make choices about their learning. Like, for example, what I mentioned before, the types of materials that they use or the types of exams that they take. We have introduced in several classes strength-based projects, and I will show you an example of what that means. Providing grading flexibility, so different grading schemes and arrangements to reduce anxiety with respect to grading, alternate exam modalities, and also student reflections and feedback. So I do want to show you an example of strength-based projects that were incorporated in our mechanics of materials class in civil engineering. This is a sophomore level course. So there were two types of tracks, the creative track and the analytical design track. So you see here types of interests and activities that are not necessarily related to civil engineering in your mind. But then the students were invited to use these creative outlets to work on the project and demonstrate certain learning objectives. So how does this work? These are some examples. So for example, a student wrote a poem that talked about that weaved different mechanics of materials concepts in there, or showed how yoga may, lead to a load distribution. A biomedical engineering student talk about different loads in bones. Some people who did videos, and all of these went together with a write-up that linked the learning objectives to the particular creative outlet that the students chose. And this was just one of the assessments that students had in the class. So what the instructor found from these activities is that a lot of students participated. Initially, this was an optional project, and every semester, as word spread, more and more students engaged in that. She also found that these projects enhanced feelings of belonging, engagement, comprehension of concepts, class participation, and skill. And we have a research project on this particular question right now. It did include in more faculty work. So that is definitely a challenge. And then overall, we found that flexibility and choice in assessment reduced the student anxiety. And I know I'm running out of time. I am almost done. So this is one example of different things that we did in the classes. If you go to our website at neurodiversity.engr.uconn.edu and you go under projects, we have actually a list of all our different courses and the different interventions. So you can find syllabi, example projects, example of alternative modalities and different things that we have done. And you can also follow us on social media, which is a platform that we use to feature and empower neurodiverse models and activities. And then finally, if you have any questions about the Include program, you can reach out to me, Connie Saiharat, who is going to moderate the discussion with me. He's the project manager. Caressa is our graduate assistant. And then we have a host of other people who are involved in this project and who are, really making a difference in the department. So with that, I will stop sharing. And thank you all for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Crusoco, for joining us and sharing your work. We're really looking forward to the breakout discussions with you and your colleague, Connie. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to jump into the breakout rooms. So welcome back to the main session, everyone. We're going to go ahead and ask our speakers and facilitators to share a quick recap of what their group talked about. So I'll start with Susan and Jody. If one of you would like to share.
Sure, I'll share. This is Jody. I'm just going to give you, we went all over the place, as you can expect, because there's lots of things to talk about. But one of the challenges is thinking about how do we support change in really large classrooms with 1,500 students, and the issues and how that's different than changing a classroom of 20 or 30. We talked some about the selection process and how we have a selection process for our project, and the answer is yes. But we accepted almost everybody who applied. And part of our approach there too was to say this is not to fix the people who you're having trouble with. We want to start with the people who are already interested in this. Talked about how do you institutionalize these kinds of programs once the money's gone, either through a Center for Teaching and Learning. Also ways of supporting it through promotion and tenure and evaluation documents. And then a real question, which we touched on a bit, was how do we reach those who, quote, need it the most, right? Who aren't the ones volunteering for this work. And part of our response, part of the discussion there was how do we change the environment so those people eventually decide, yeah, I think I need to look into this and decide it. And we did have some discussion too on grading systems and how grading is often an unexamined part of our practice, and how to examine that and think about how do we do that differently in ways that support students to engage in learning and not just last minute studying and memorizing. Other things you want to add to that, Susan?
Nope, that was a pretty comprehensive list. Thanks. Thanks for everyone who was part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you both. Sounds like a really great discussion. I'll turn it over to Marissa and Connie if you'd like to share.
There I am. Okay. So we talked about, it was great because people shared their own personal experiences from their institutions and their personal life on the narrative around neurodiversity and how, you know, often there, I mean, it's very much centered around stigma. And especially students as they transition from the secondary education to higher education, like often they lose any accommodations that they have. They do not want to have a conversation or, you know, be kind of like set aside and go to the Center for Students with Disabilities, and as a result, you know, they are not part of an inclusive environment. So we talked about ways that we can support faculty to do this work of changing their courses, starting from low-hanging fruit of like changing the language and changing the narrative, all the way up to offering, you know, projects, practical work, you know, alternative assessments. So there is kind of like a continuum of practices that one can consider. We talked about changing the culture and having places where neurodiverse students can mentor each other. They can find support. What else? What am I not thinking, Connie? Let's see. I'm just looking at the chat to see if I'm missing something about deadlines and how, and the importance of deadlines for students. So providing flexibility on that, you know, and finding kind of like a middle ground where people feel like they can have a deadline, but it's not way too far out. And we also talked about group work and how, you know, we can get away from the notion that everyone in the group is going to do the exact same thing and contribute like the exact same amount, but it's more about forming groups where people can complement their strengths. And then empower especially students with ADHD to like use their creativity early on in the group process. Yeah, I think that about captures some of the things that we talked about.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you all so much. I just want to close by thanking our presenters and facilitators, as well as the rest of the AAAS IUS team. I'd also like to thank everyone who was able to join and participate in today's presentations and discussions. We do have a post-event survey link, which is posted in the chat, and we really appreciate your feedback, especially as we're planning for next year's workshops. Additionally, a recording of this presentation will be posted on our website in the coming week. And once again, we want to thank you all for joining us today. And as always, we look forward to engaging with and learning from you, the AAAS IUS community. Thanks, everyone.